tragedy struck the sports and hockey world recently when former NHL player Adam Johnson tragically passed away as a result of a skate striking and cutting his neck during play. There's nothing that needs reviewed or explaining with what happened here in this tragic situation. Instead, I want to use this as an opportunity in the video to talk about my feelings and some actual real data out there regarding neck protection and general just equipment protection in the NHL, because that appropriately is going to be a big point of discussion. And I think there's some historical things we can learn from with this situation, some data that we can actually point to regarding which neck guards might be most effective, and just my general thoughts with player health and safety here as it relates to equipment in the NHL. Now, Johnson isn't the first time we've seen something like this occur. Of course, I think everybody remembers Clint Marlichuk, the goalie, who infamously, a skate came up, struck him in the neck. He was fortunate enough to be able to survive his accident. And then also Richard Zednik suffered a similar injury with a skate coming to his throat, causing a cut, but also was fortunate enough to survive. I do want to look back at when Zednik was injured because I think it's important to understand just what the baseline risk and how often a situation like this might happen in the sport of hockey before we talk about instituting different rules and regulations. With a goalie, I think it makes more sense. Players are constantly falling around the net. There's a lot of chaos around the net, and it makes perfect sense that a goalie is going to be at higher risk of a player being flipped over and a skate coming up close to their neck. But Zednik, of course, not a goalie, and in his situation, again, just a player on his same team who was falling over, his skate came up and struck him in the throat. And so this was another situation away from the goalie where, yes, guys are going to be flipping around. The skates are extremely sharp. There's going to be a lot of times in this sport where you could have high risk and you can catch a skate to the throat, to the neck, to the face, or even the eye, like we've seen in some other examples. So I think it's important to realize, first of all, this isn't just some really rare kind of thing that is never going to be a possible risk. There are situations where players can flip, skates can be up near the neck. And so I do think we have to consider that possibility in making some of these equipment recommendations. Here in the NHL, and frankly in most hockey organizations, wearing neck guards or a neck protector is not mandated. In fact, in the league that Johnson was playing in, it was not mandatory, but they've recently made a change to where now these neck guards are going to be mandatory after his passing. They're certainly not mandatory in the NHL. In fact, in the NHL, we still have players who aren't wearing eye protection or face shields, which to me seems a little bit hypocritical if the NHL decides that they're going to institute neck guards. I think you have to look at other lower hanging fruit for player safety and institute something like eye protection, because there's very clear data and evidence to support decrease in eye and face trauma when players are wearing face shields. And we still have a number of players, albeit very small, but players in the NHL who are still permitted to not have to wear a face shield, which, yes, it's not as significant of an injury if you lose an eye, but can still be extremely detrimental. And so I think we need to also have the conversation with equipment safety, talking about face shields. And it's crazy to me that face shields have not been mandated. I know it's kind of grandfathered in, and a lot of future guys are going to wear face protection. And at the lower leagues, for example, high school, college, they're required to wear them. It's just the NHL where they don't yet. So I hope that we also see that discussion come up regarding eye protection, not just neck guards. The idea with these neck guards is pretty simple. This is one from Skate Armor, and as we'll talk about, there's actually a study that shows this is a really, really effective one at preventing cuts, and it does just what you would imagine. It's generally a sort of soft material that goes around the neck to help protect against sticks and also skates. Remember, it's not just skates coming up and striking the neck. It could also be a stick from a player that could hit you in the neck, and so this might potentially cause some protection from that. When I was first, hearing about neck guards, I always thought they would be these hard, rigid plastic things, but they're actually more soft. It's almost like a built-up turtleneck that you're wearing to help protect the neck. And so this is what we're talking about with this whole conversation regarding neck guards. And there's a lot of them out there, a lot of different manufacturers, a lot of different styles, and a lot of different materials that go into them. And thankfully, we actually have some research to tease out which might be more effective than others. This was a study done in 2015 where they looked at 46 samples of 14 different types of neck guards and developed this machine to serve as a neck surrogate and actually test to see which of them were the most resistant to a cut from a skate. A couple different testing parameters, and obviously this is not perfect, but this is some objective testing data on which of these different neck guards might be best at protecting from a skate cut. In their conclusions, they found that Skate Armor neck guards had the highest cut resistance, and the Bauer N7 Neck Tech had the lowest cut resistance. Also, neck guards that were made from this specific Spectra guard or 2 layers of Kevlar were found to be the most cut resistant. There were some variabilities about skate blade angle in terms of how much that would make a cut based on some physics properties, but it did find from at least their studied and their testing that this skate armor brand, these neck guards were the most cuss resistant. And that's what I was showing you earlier. It is nice to see that if you go to their website, they have a nice little message here and have actually had to stop taking orders, presumably because they've been getting a lot of attraction and use because of what happened. You can even see here rated #1 neck protector guard by the Mayo Clinic. That's where I believe that study was performed that I just showed you earlier. The difference between these is pretty clear. You know, this is that Bauer N7 neck tech, and you can see how it's maybe not as robust. There's potentially going to be more areas of the skin that could be uncovered or more exposed. Compared to what we see here with the skate armor, it seems to have a little bit better coverage and probably also comes down to the exact material that's being used. Important to know though that these things aren't perfect, right? So if we see these rules implemented, we'll probably still see some injuries from skate blades or sticks just because you can't have anything 100%. This was a study, again, conducted by, I believe, that same group out of Mayo Clinic, I want to say. And they did some surveying, looking at USA hockey players that were registered, what percentage of them were wearing neck protectors, how many of them got a laceration. They had pretty good response, 26,000, and about half of them were currently wearing some neck protection. But a decent percentage of them, I mean, it's 2%, but that's still a lot of people to get a neck injury. And 27% of those that had a laceration were wearing neck protection. So again, they're not perfect. They're still going to cause some injury, but hopefully can prevent something serious like what we saw happening with Johnson from occurring. And I think one final interesting thing to consider with the neck protectors is, of course, every argument, you've got to look for the downsides. And they considered this. They looked at influence of neck protectors on cervical range of motion, because obviously in a sport like hockey, where you're going to be having to adapt, you have to see hits coming, you have to protect yourself from these impacts and these hits, be able to quickly look and see where the puck is. You need to have quick cervical range of motion. And unfortunately, they did show a reduced neck range of motion when you were wearing a neck protector, which makes sense. If you have something built up around your neck, it's going to be harder to move. You might feel more impeded. And with that might come its own risk of injuries. What all this comes down to for me from a safety perspective is that I think absolutely at the young, lower levels of hockey, neck guards should be mandatory as face protection is mandatory, and we are starting to limit how much players hit at a young age. The only reason I don't think this is going to maybe work or be as receptive on a larger scale, say like in the NHL, a league where we can't even get all the players to wear eye protection, is players have developed that skill set to be able to adapt, turn their head, turn their neck. And I think if you force everybody to suddenly start wearing neck protectors, you might see enough impact in neck range of motion that it could affect play or could put those players at more risk of other injuries to, say, the neck from an impact or concussion. If you make that change at a lower level, players develop knowing that they're wearing those neck guards and develop their skills with that reduced cervical mobility at a young age. And so you're able to more slowly adapt to it than at the highest level, suddenly making a drastic change and then forcing players to adapt on the fly. If they do make them mandatory and players are able to adapt and we don't see any higher incidence of cervical spine injuries, then that's fantastic. I'm all for that. I just think practically implementing it on a lower level and letting those players gradually work their way up through the system and then be required, say high school, start to mandate it in college, and then work your way up to the pros is probably going to be the most effective strategy. Yes, if you see professionals doing something, the young kids are going to be more likely to do it. But I think when you're talking about a sport that has so much skill development, I would just wonder about how much that range of motion would come into play. I'd love to hear from players at a higher level who wear these things. Maybe that range of motion was just purely from a study and isn't something that practically matters, in which case, great. Institute it immediately, make them required right away. Because anything we can do to save the health and safety of some players without compromising the kind of root integrity of the sport is fantastic. I'm all for it. And again, I hope that they also look at eye protection, because that's still, I think, a glaring hole in NHL player health and safety is not mandating eyewear for all players. Unfortunately, sometimes big change takes terrible events to push them along. And so I hope that if anything positive can come out of this tragedy with Adam Johnson, it's that more players in hockey start to look at things they can do to improve their health and safety, whether it's wearing a face shield or considering wearing a neck guard. I hope that this encourages players to take a step back and encourages leagues to take a step back and look at what they can do to keep players safer on the ice, because this is something that is absolutely tragic, should never happen, and hopefully we never see happen again. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below, and until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.